Joining us now, Abigail Spanberger, Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, representing the 7th District. If you're from outside of Virginia, that is the Central Virginia area, kind of like parts of Richmond, Henrico, Chesterfield, goes all the way out to Goochland and our new listeners on WJFN 100.5 FM. Thanks for being with us. And Abigail Spanberger joining us now. She's got committee assignments. We're going to start by talking about that and the wall and the shutdown and Venezuela, and she's with us now. Congresswoman Spanberger, welcome back. Great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, John.
Okay, so you get named to serve as chair of the House Agriculture Committee, the subcommittee on conservation and forestry.
Yeah,
so tell us about that.
Yeah, so I was assigned to the Agriculture Committee and the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. Those were my two top choices. And then part of that is, so once assigned to one of the major committees, then we get our subcommittee assignments. And so my subcommittee assignments on the Agriculture Committee is I'm on the subcommittee for commodities, exchanges, energy, and credit, which is a really great assignment, particularly for our district, because that handles a lot of our initiatives related to broadband internet infrastructure, which across 8 of our 10 counties is a major issue. And then I was also appointed to be the subcommittee chair for the subcommittee on conservation and forestry. And I'm excited about that one because it does a lot in terms of conservation research, strengthening watersheds, making sure that our soil is healthy for, our farms and our sportsmen across the district and across the country.
And then tell me about your assignment to foreign relations.
Foreign affairs.
Foreign affairs.
And then my second committee assignment is the Foreign Affairs Committee. There's 6 different subcommittees on that. On foreign affairs focused on kind of Western Hemisphere, European area, Asia, North Africa. There's 6 different divisions, and they're in the midst of sort of changing them a bit. So I actually have a meeting this afternoon to get my subcommittee assignments there. So I'm not sure where I'm going to focus on the foreign affairs side of things, but I do already have my agriculture subcommittee appointments.
Congresswoman Spanberger, who is the chair now of foreign affairs?
Elliot Engel from New York.
Okay, so basically he's going to decide, and leadership then decides on what your subcommittee assignments are.
So I'm not. The true answer is I'm not sure how it's going to be done on foreign affairs. The way that we went into, and this is my only experience, I'm a new member of Congress, I haven't served previously. When we went to the agriculture meeting, I went in with my choice of where I wanted to be, and they went down the line and asked us. And so, because of that, the way that they went through the process, I was able, based on the list choice on the Agriculture Committee, to get a subcommittee chairpersonship. I know that I'm going into the Foreign Affairs Committee with my list of choices. I'm not sure if they are going to tap us for those or if we get to choose as we did on the Agriculture Committee. So I will be able to update you on how it all worked the next time we speak, but I'm not 100% sure this time.
May we ask what is your top choice?
Well, so I was really torn. My background, I'm sure many of your listeners know, my background is in national security. I was a former CIA officer. I worked undercover as a case officer with CIA, recruiting people to provide information to the U.S. government on a variety of issues, from nuclear proliferation issues, counterterrorism issues, some narco trafficking, and then a variety of kind of regional issues. So all that to say that I have many interests in places where I think I could add value. Going into this, my top 2 choices at this moment would be the subcommittee on European affairs that also deals with our multilateral agreements, our engagement in NATO, for example, and then our bilateral and multilateral relationships with other European countries. And there's a lot of work based on my prior experience related to kind of counterterrorism efforts and cooperation that would fall with that committee. Mm-hmm. And then my second choice would be Asia and nuclear proliferation. And so the focus there would be, predominantly China, North Korea, South Korea, and the nuclear proliferation issues. So those would be going into this, those are my top 2 choices right now. But frankly, any subcommittee would be of interest to me.
No, you're such a team player, Congresswoman Spanberger. Well, go in there and say, look, I just upset Dave brat in the 7th district. I'm in a Republican district. I want the chairman. I want what I want, man. Bang your fist on the table, right? Don't get rolled.
This one, so I'm excited because on that was. There was no fist banging, I will assure you, but when it comes to my subcommittees on the Agriculture Committee, I really wanted commodity exchanges, energy, in order to really be able to function and focus on the question of broadband internet in rural communities. So listen, I have exerted that level of enthusiasm, John. I promise you.
Well,
no
I have no doubt, and you've got the credentials. You've got the credentials, and you've got the leverage because if your speaker wants to maintain power going into 2020, these are the kind of seats that you won that they're going to have to hold. So you have a tremendous amount of leverage. I think everybody understands that. And look, good for you and good for the people of the district. And we'll see what plays out. Let's get to some of the issues here, Congresswoman Spanberger. Let's start with the 3-week negotiation. The government back open. I was not in favor of the shutdown from day one. As you know, it never works out. It's dumb. And so I was opposed to it, but it is what it is. Now we have to look forward, not back. 3 weeks of negotiation. Are you in favor of negotiating with the Republicans and President Trump and providing the president with money for his wall?
So I'm in favor, and this is what I've been in favor of the entire time, and I've signed on to a couple letters, and as I know you know, I went with a bipartisan group to the White House to sit down and talk to the president, because I think that these conversations have to be bipartisan and they have to be bicameral. And really what that amounts to is we have reached a fever pitch point in our conversations related to what is border security, what isn't border security, what it is that we do or don't need. And I think that we're focusing it a lot more on politics than on actual infrastructure that's necessary for us to protect our border and our ports of entry. And so I think that the conversations have to be bipartisan because what we can't do is we cannot say, okay, on the House side, we're in the majority, on the Senate side, the Republicans are in the majority, and therefore we kind of just shout at each other for the next 3 weeks because then we're no better off than where we were. And frankly, if our goal truly is to ensure that we have the best security at our borders and ports of entry possible, it also is not meeting that goal. So the conversations do have to be bipartisan, and I believe to make them most effective bicameral so that, ultimately when we are bringing these discussions to the president and ideally signing off on a bill that we voted on that's passed in the House and the Senate, that the president will know that has been a joint effort between both parties and both sides of Congress. And in terms of what the results should actually look like, there have been prior attempts to really move forward on immigration reform, be it and border security improvements, and linking those two things in tandem. In some ways, they go together very well. In some ways, they don't. But historically, from the 2013 negotiations, it was immigration reform and border security were linked in terms of how we looked at this comprehensive project. And then there have been additional efforts. You've probably heard me speak about it before, but last Congress, there was a bill put forth by Will Hurd, a Republican from Texas, and Pete Aguilar, a Democrat from California, and it was a bipartisan bill focused on, really assessing what it is that we need at the border. Part of their bill was a request for a mile-by-mile assessment of what is needed. And the thing about the southern border, and I did with CIA work.
Wait a minute. Wait a second. We have heard from multiple people at the border, our border security agents. We have heard from them over and over and over, including our Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, who says we don't need a mile-by-mile 8-year assessment. We need a wall now. So my question gets back to, we have 3-week period of negotiation. Are you in favor of providing the president with some of the money specifically he asked for building a wall? I mean, are you going to vote up or down, and are you in favor of some money for the wall? Yes or no?
So I'm going to answer your question, but bear with me for a second. So I am not suggesting necessarily that we need to start from scratch from the mile-by-mile assessment, and some people would argue that we do. I have had the opportunity to talk to the Commissioner of Customs and Border Patrol, and I have looked at some of the maps that they've already put forward. So kind of splitting the difference in the two parts in what I've said and what you've said is the fact that, I do think that we need to have a strong assessment of what's actually necessary at the border. Some would argue we need to start from scratch, but we already have those assessments that CBP has made, that it's available with Department of Homeland Security, looking at the borders where law enforcement officers, the ones who are tasked with protecting our borders and ports of entry, but in this particular case, we are talking about the southern border, where they have looked across the southern border and said these are places where, we need physical infrastructure. There are already hundreds of miles of fencing at parts along the border, and those were put in place previously because of the fact that in helping people patrol the southern border, if you can patrol fewer places, because some of them are blocked by some level of physical infrastructure, and in some places we have canyons, and some places we have rivers, there's already physical barriers that make it harder for people to cross into this country without being detected, or cross with something they might be trying to smuggle into this country without being detected. So the full answer is, having also, my background as a CIA officer, having worked drug trafficking cases across the southern border, I am not naive to the fact that there are frequently tunnels, there are submarines that narco traffickers will use off the coast. We cannot simplify the conversation to a place where we say a physical barrier, be it a wall, a fence, or whatever, is going to stop all of the threats. But we also need to recognize that there are places where some sort of physical barrier does help law enforcement, which is why we already have hundreds of miles of physical barriers along the southern border.
All right, so
what I'm going to be looking for in a bill that I sign off on is, I want to make sure, is it looking at the threats and challenges that actually face our law enforcement personnel? Meaning, is this based on information provided to us by law enforcement personnel? Is it talking about the real risks when, how do we react, and how do we counteract efforts to build tunnels underneath fences? How do we react when they're dropping drugs off the coast and bringing in dinghies off the coast of San Diego, which happens? How is it that we're ensuring that Coast Guard has the ability to interdict the drugs that are being brought along the coastline? How are we ensuring that our interdiction efforts at ports of entry, when people bring through massive trucks and you've got drugs, hidden in avocados, which, in an avocado truck, that we have the infrastructure that can address all of these things? I am looking for a bill that is going to acknowledge the actual threats and not just kind of talking points. However, recognizing that we're part of that larger strategy that is addressing real threats, and some of those real threats are people are bringing stuff across the southern border, not at a point of entry.
So are you going to vote for some of the money for the president's wall? This is a simple question. You're a member of Congress. Yeah. He's asking for $5.9 billion. He reopened the government. And so it sounds like you're saying, and I don't mean to get frustrated, but it sounds like you want a comprehensive bill, but the president is asking for some money, $5.9 billion now, for a barrier. It seems like what you've said to me is that barriers work in certain areas. So if they work in certain areas, why wouldn't you vote as a moderate Democrat to give the president some of the money that he's asking for so we can all move forward? That's my question.
Yeah, and so I will vote to provide money that is going to provide for our security. And if in the end, that aligns with some of what the president has wanted, or some of what the president hasn't wanted, or it makes him happy or it doesn't make him happy, this is about actually addressing the challenges and the threats that we're facing at the border. And so let me assure you, I am not going into this saying anything to the effect of, let's do the opposite of what the president wants. That is not leadership. That is ineffective. I agree with that. Purely partisan politics. I'm also not going to go in there and say that it's effective for somebody who wants to, who may be from the opposite political party, to listen to someone say, let's do exactly what the president wants. My question is, what's the best thing for actually securing our southern border? And if a dollar amount is less than what he's requested, then that's the right amount. If it's more than what he's requested, then that's the right amount. But it cannot be politically driven when we're really trying to address issues of security. Right. And the one thing that I think is important to make clear the president along the campaign trail spoke frequently about this wall, and the notion seemed very much that it was a wall from coast to coast. In my meeting with him and in television interviews that I have seen him do, he's been a lot clearer that his notion of a wall is no longer a structure, a wall-like structure that goes from coast to coast.
Right.
And so I think even when, and I think just because the precision language is important, I am absolutely in favor of looking at comprehensive strategies, which our current border security strategy includes fencing and physical barrier infrastructure. And so I am not opposed to improving upon what exists and potentially adding additional pieces of physical barrier infrastructure where necessary, as deemed necessary by law enforcement. But if that needs to be separated out from any of the sort of political conversations where the talk of the wall has been this, monumental structure that goes from coast to coast, which the president has very publicly now multiple times said is no longer what he's seeking.
Thank you for the clarity on that. So it sounds like what you're saying is you're open-minded to more money for a barrier if it is part of a comprehensive bill that adds security to the border. Sounds like you're saying you're not for an open border situation. And I would also, Congresswoman Spanberger, take from our conversation that you don't agree with a statement of your speaker that a barrier or a wall is immoral. Is that an accurate assessment?
I think that the most effective way that we can talk about these things is what is the goal that we're trying to achieve. And so, once we start talking in emotion, I think that we end up talking past each other or talking in a way that is not as productive. My goal is kind of twofold on this front. One, ensure we never have another government shutdown, because the detriment to our economy, the detriment to individual workers, just the level of anxiety that caused, and certainly the national security implications were tremendous, and I don't think that we should go down that path again. But when we are looking, I spent my time overseas when I was here domestically working to protect this country. It is a personal passion of mine to understand deeply the real hard challenges that we face because we are this incredible country, and there are threats that are against us because of that. There are threats that could undermine our national security, the drug traffickers bringing drugs across the border, the implications that have on our communities as we've seen, shifts and changes in the trends of drug use. There are so many reasons why, we need to make sure that we know what and who is coming across our border, but we need to make sure that we're actually doing it in an effective way and in a way where we're helping law enforcement do its job. Before I joined CIA, I was a federal agent. I worked narcotics and money laundering cases in the D.C. area. So, I've knocked down doors in drug dealers' houses in Baltimore and in the D.C. area. Like, I've been on that side of it as well. I know the tremendous pressure that law enforcement can be under. I understand the tremendous commitment that they show our community, and where we can provide the infrastructure necessary for them to be able to do their job. That is something that I think as legislators we have a duty to do, and that is starting with listening to them, understanding the assessments of what it is that's necessary for them to do their job, asking questions, challenging their assessments, right? There has to be, that's a purpose as well, to make sure that we're making the right choices. And so for me, I think it really comes down to, it can't be about, politically.
Right. So you want to secure the southern border.
Yes, the president wants this. So
you want to secure the southern border, and you want to keep politics out of it. Okay, I'm for that. You're opposed to shutdowns. They're stupid. We're in 100% agreement with that. They are stupid beyond belief. I'm not in favor of them ever. Either party, it's dumb. So do you favor Rick Scott, Senator Scott has a bill. Do you favor Congress people like yourself not getting paid with no back pay if there's another government shutdown? Do you favor that or not? Yes or no?
100%. And I would actually just say on the House side, on the 3rd of January, which was our swearing-in day, I was original co-sponsor for a bill that was introduced that would, because of the constitutional issues, the current Congress can't fully impact its own salary. But the bill that we put in would, in the 116th Congress, it would withhold our pay if there's a case of a future shutdown. In future shutdowns, it would members of Congress on the House and Senate side both would not get paid. And I was one of the members of Congress who sent the letter requesting that my pay be withheld for the entirety of this shutdown, because I just think we need other. If people, be it on the executive branch and the administration or in the legislative branch, are willing to use the salaries of hardworking federal employees and kind of the security and very function of our government as a bargaining chip, then their salary should be on the table as
I'm
well.
100% behind that.
Yeah.
I hope you get that passed. I've only got a couple more minutes, just a few more questions. So Kamala Harris, who could be your Democratic nominee that you're going to be running with in 2020, Altogether Possible, came out with a plan yesterday to eliminate all private health insurance carriers, make private health insurance illegal, going to a Medicaid for all plan. Do you favor that?
So I have only read a couple articles about this. I haven't dug into her plan, so I don't want to speak fully to what she's saying or isn't saying. I'm going to speak to what it is that I support. And I support expanding healthcare coverage. The best way to ensure that we're keeping our healthcare costs down is by ensuring that more people have affordable, quality healthcare, access to preventative medicine, access to the prescription drugs that they need for chronic illness, the rest of it. That impacts everyone, because if someone can get the antibiotics that they need, they're not ending up in the ER with pneumonia 3 weeks later. If somebody can get the insulin that they need reliably, then they're not ending up in the ER with a kind of acute, immediate need for ER services. So that's where I stand kind of as an overarching principle. And what that equates to for me is I do believe that we should have a public option plan to provide greater competition in the marketplace, to work in tandem with private insurers. And a public option, one of the proposals was proposed on the Senate side by Senator Tim Kaine, and it's an option for people to buy into
that makes sense.
A public option. It's called Medicare X, so it would be modeled after the Medicare program.
Yeah, it's an option.
And available for
right.
individuals
If you don't want it, don't buy it. That's why I'm in favor of the public option. If you don't want to buy into the Medicaid X program, don't buy it. It's an option.
If you want Cigna, you keep Cigna.
Right.
If you want Blue Cross Blue Shield,
but
keep that.
That would mean that though you're not in favor of what Senator Harris is proposing, which is you eliminate all private insurance options. Okay, two more questions. Your colleague, freshman from the Bronx, Congressman Cortez, has proposed a 70% marginal tax rate on incomes, I think, over $10 million. Are you in favor of that? Yes or no?
No. But I will say this. When we were having conversations about the tax reform of 2017, I think we do need comprehensive tax reform. I think we need to be able to have honest conversations about what it is that our tax dollars are and are not funding, how it is that we ensure that the government has revenues through taxation that is necessary to meet all of our national priorities. But I think overall, starting conversations about such serious things in less formal manner, and I'd say less formal manner by saying like in interviews or on social media, I think that actually complicates and can challenge real conversations, because we're all of a sudden at a starting point where we're talking about a 70% taxation rate or marginal taxation rate, where let's step it back and say, what are our goals? Where are we currently with our tax revenue? What changes did 2017 make? And how is it that we can ensure that our fiscal trajectory is a solid one that allows our government to do all the things that it needs to do? But I think just kind of arbitrarily picking a new place to tax more people is not that's not the path I would choose.
Senator Elizabeth Warren, this is my final question, because this is what you have to deal with now as a Democratic freshman Congresswoman Spanberger in your Democratic caucus now. So Senator Warren comes out yesterday with a wealth tax. Basically, if you have wealth, I don't know how you figure this out, but if your net worth is $50 million, doesn't affect me or many other people I know, or nobody I know, but she says if your net worth is over $50 million, you're going to be subject to a 5% wealth tax annually. I mean, these are ideas that are incomprehensible only a short period of time ago. Is that something you favor?
And I haven't read her full plan either.
But conceptually.
Yeah, but in principle, I can say, I think the goal then, the question then becomes, well, for what purpose are we looking to kind of raise those additional revenues, and what's the intended outcome?
Well, she says it's for income equality. She says it's for income equality. Too many people, she says, make too much money. That's what she said in her statement.
Yeah, and I'll say this because we're the land of opportunity, right? Everybody dreams of striking it rich and building some great company or not. And so I think that we should never, I'll speak for myself. I will never say that it's a bad thing that somebody's making too much money. I think the societal issue that we really should be looking at is what happens when, there's a certain group of people who are making tremendous amounts of money, and the relative to working class, that the lifestyle that the working class has relative to what their opportunity used to be is facing a challenge. And so, there's a lot of numbers and data to show that, relative to where working class Americans were, middle class Americans were 50 years ago, that their opportunity has lessened or that their buying power has lessened. And so I'd much rather concern myself with, how is it that we've gotten to that place? What's happening within our economy? What's happening? And some of it might be taxation, right? That might be one of the reasons why there's this issue. But you'll never hear me say that the issue is that rich people are making too much money. But I will very much heartily want to have conversations about what's happening to working class and middle class Americans, that they're not able to kind of live in the same way that the same relative income would have been 50 years ago.
So the overriding question I have to go is, what is the space for a moderate centrist Democrat such as yourself in the new progressive-driven now wing of your house? Because a lot of these things that are come out, I mean, you never would have seen them even a short period of time ago. And so I know you're a moderate. I know you're a centrist. How do you navigate your way through this?
Well, and I think, it's funny because people will label me as all sorts of things. I'm not even sure what label I would choose for myself. I think I'm a pragmatist. I want to get things done, and I'm oriented towards finding solutions. The interesting thing about the Democratic Party right now, because there is a lot of talk about this, there's wildly divergent ideas in terms of where we should be and where we should go. And I honestly think that at this juncture, that's a good thing, because as long as we are talking about what it is we're trying to achieve, what it is we're worried about, what it is we're trying to solve for, then having people throw out ideas, no matter how much I disagree with them or agree with them, I think there's value in being able to say, I disagree with so-and-so's proposal for these reasons, and instead I would offer this idea, because it's in working through why it is that you support something or why it is that you don't support something that you can become stronger in your own assessment and your own position. So I think that there's great strength in having so many different ideas and so many kind of different voices as part of this large symphony. Sometimes it's less melodious than other times. But I think that that's actually really helpful, because we're bringing a lot of different conversation points to the table. Where that becomes difficult is if people just get locked in, and this is my idea, it's my way or the highway, right? Then right. It becomes more of a challenge.
I agree with that.
So I think in terms of where I find myself in the place where I'm listening to everybody's idea. I'm not necessarily going to just discount an idea because it came from someone who I generally disagree with, or agree with something because it came from someone I generally agree with. I think that someone like me, and a lot of where I find myself is driven by the district that I represent. I represent a middle-of-the-road district. And so I think that there's a great opportunity for people like me representing a middle-of-the-road district where we have wildly divergent ideas. In the 7th District of Virginia, we have wildly different needs. I mean, we are a rural district. We are a
right.
suburban district.
Right.
We have so much going on that I think it presents a strong opportunity for somebody like me to really be let's talk about what it looks like in middle-of-the-road districts where we've got a little bit of everything. And so, by virtue of where my district is, I'm used to kind of dealing with the broad spectrum of opinions. And I honestly think that's what makes you better, when you can cull through a broad spectrum of opinions and ideas and land on one place that everybody can agree on. Now, you got to do the hard work to get people to agree with you, but that's a different story. But in terms of what I think of the current, working in the current Democratic Party, I think it presents a tremendous amount of opportunity.
Abigail, we're out of time. I really appreciate it. I want to thank Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger for being with us. More information, spanberger.house.gov. Congresswoman Spanberger, I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.